Hey, welcome to our talk and tour today with Garden Gate Magazine. Today we are talking with my friend Ed Lyon. He's the Director of Horticulture for Reiman Gardens in Ames, Iowa. He is also the author of Growing the Midwest Garden. And today we're going to take a tour of his garden. And Ed, before we start, maybe you could explain for the folks. And by the way, Ed's garden is featured on the cover of the March-April issue of Garden Gate Magazine. We'll show it to you here. So that's Ed's garden. And we're going to take a tour today. But before we start, I want to explain that Ed had a similar job. He's a professional horticulturist in Wisconsin and moved here about how many years ago, Ed?
Actually, six. Yesterday, January 20th, was my 6th anniversary at the gardens.
And will you just explain for folks so they can understand the task that took place in moving here and how you moved plants to this location?
Sure. First, I'm going to make a small correction because my director of horticulture won't be happy if I'm called the director of horticulture. I'm actually the director of the gardens here. But when I moved here, and we're talking roughly 250 or 275 miles, I made the decision to move my garden with me. I had an 8-year-old garden, and even that 8-year-old garden in Wisconsin had plants brought to that garden. So we're talking some plant materials that had some age and maturity on them. So my option was, do I move out here to Iowa and start all over again? There's several issues with that, enormous amounts of cost to get back to that number of plant materials, but I'm also would be starting with a lot of small plants. So it was a rather interesting process. I did over 10 days. It went over a Memorial Day weekend where I killed off all the grass on the property on this site. I outlined everything that was going to be planted. I brought in organic matter, created beds. I disappeared for about 5 days. So my neighbors in the neighborhood probably thought, what the heck? This guy has bought this property. He's killed off all of his grass and he's gone. But then I went back. I pretty much by myself hand dug all of the plant materials that I planned to bring here, which was probably pretty close to 80% of what I had planted there. Loaded up a 28-foot moving truck. So I tell people I had a moving truck specifically and only for plants. I brought them out, and over the next 3 days, I built both my front, side, and back gardens. The only thing I didn't plant at that time that are now planted are the terraces. So I come back to the neighborhood, and all of a sudden the neighborhood sees this instant garden within 3 days.
Hey, so Ed, let's start with that first image so folks can see what we're talking about.
Sure.
And here we see your front yard, and I don't see a stitch of grass anywhere.
No, and as I said, now even the terraces or health strip, whichever term you want to use, are planted. And I joke with people and I say, well, if you see grass in my yard, it's either a weed or it's ornamental. There is no turf grass whatsoever.
Tell us a little bit about your house, Ed.
The house, and you're looking at the front of it, it's obviously Victorian. It was built in 1910. They did do an addition on it in the 80s. It's sort of brick sided in one story coming off the back. And the joke in the neighborhood is it's the McDonald's edition because it has sort of a similar look to some of the McDonald's, but it really did increase the length of the house. The lot itself is quite long, but also increased a lot of the living space as well.
So we're looking at a long and narrow lot here.
Yes, indeed.
And I know we're going to get through this. I know we see a lily in bloom in the foreground here. But before we jump into your whole garden, maybe you want to give folks an idea about exactly how many lilies you have in this landscape.
I just made yet another order. I'm a fanatic and eccentric, so I thought, well, I'm going to look and see how many, and I do try to keep track. I'm up to about 1,200 lilies. Lilies alone planted in this sort of average size plot. And you consider there's probably somewhere around maybe 3,500 to 4,000 other plants. So yes, I do shoehorn planting.
And Ed, I noticed right to the left there, I can see a little outdoor structure. What are we looking at there?
Believe it or not, working at Reiman Gardens, we do 4 different changeouts in our conservatory with different themes. One year, this was built in the conservatory. It represents an actual orangerie. In fact, it was built from a picture of an orangerie by one of our volunteers. When it came time to take that display down, this was going to be dismantled. And I said, oh my God, we need to save it. So I paid the gardens for the structure. It was not roofed. So we reassembled it here, put a roof on it. We put a more substantial floor in it. It's 18 by 12. And it just makes for a wonderful little addition as a garden room, entertainment area. Love spending time out in it in the summer. People will see plastic on it during the winter. It's not a heated greenhouse, but I do use it to store things like the Japanese maples that otherwise might die. It's enough protection for them to be dormant in. And then in the spring, I start seeds out there, and I'll bring in some of my plant orders earlier and let some of that stuff grow out and acclimate before I put it in the ground. So it has a number of uses.
So in the winter, at this time of year, you sort of are using that as folks would use an unheated garage, perhaps.
Exactly. Yes.
All right, let's go to the next image. Do you want to tell us about one of your lovelies? Tell us a little bit about Swansea.
Yeah, at one point somebody asked me, knowing how passionate I am about plants, and there are many groups of enthusiasts of various genera, people who love hostas, people who love daylilies, and somebody says, do you have a favorite plant? And I said, no, I love them all. But then I realized I really have a strong affection for lilies. And I think part of it is because many of them still have fragrance, and that's something we've lost in a lot of our garden plants. And I started out actually with the strongest interest in species lilies. I started getting interested in martigons. And one of the reasons I hadn't been doing the standard lilies like the Asiatics, Orientals, and such was because we were, just like the irises, breeding these enormous flowers on stalks that weren't holding them up. And I'm like, I just don't want to spend the time out there staking up all these lilies. But breeding in lilies produced a hybrid that we call the Orient Pet. And they're crosses between trumpets and Orientals. They can get massively tall. I had one last year that was 8 feet tall. Swansea is one of the Orient Pets. But what came in that breeding is a really thick, almost tree-like stalk that holds these flowers up. And I think that revolutionized, and not that I don't still have to stake some lilies, but I think it really helped with that whole maintenance issue that went with them. In fact, it irritates me because you'll also often we'll see mail order catalogs that are talking about buying tree lilies, and people call them tree lilies. Well, they're the Orient Pets. But they aren't trees. And as a horticulturist, I certainly don't want people to think they're trees. But so now I have a tremendous variation amongst Orient Pets, Asiatics, Orientals, and species.
Okay, let's go to the next image. And here we are giving folks just a rough layout of the land. We won't dwell on this too much, but I do want folks to see the amount of terrace or hell strip gardens that you have, because you're actually on a corner lot. How long are those hell strips?
The longest one would be about 200 feet, and the one in front is probably about 75 feet. I did do the hell strip back in Wisconsin, but it was a short strip in front of the house. Here, And this one's actually wider than the one I had back in Wisconsin. It's probably close to 12 feet wide. So quite a lot of area in there. Now, every time I plant health strips, I know I'm doing it in municipal owned property. And I know very well that at any given time, if they need to dig it up for something, that's on me. And I'm very proactive about it. If I know anything that is going to happen, I'm right in touch with the city and say, hey, I've got this here. I'll do everything I can to make it easy for you to do the work you do. So I do want to let people know that if this is something you're considering doing, check what your municipality rules and regulations are. I'm very conscious of the places where people have to see to make turns and such. So the plant materials are lower in those areas as well.
That's important for folks to keep in mind. Now let's jump over to the next image. And Ed, I can see this is along the sidewalk along your health strip, but you came up with this really ingenious way of creating a visual barrier. Do you want to explain how you came up with that?
Yeah, one of the big issues if you're going to plant your health strip or have any gardening close to the sidewalk is dogs. And people will allow their dogs to defecate and urinate in those areas. They are, after all, the city property. And I don't want to be the neighbor that goes out and say, would you please not let your dog do that? Dog urine will kill plants. So I thought, well, a friendly way to do that was to put up this barrier, and it does run the entire sidewalk edge of all of my terrace. And it visually says to anybody with dogs and probably even children, hey, here's a separation. And I just think it's sort of a nice visual to get across what I need without, having to say to people, please don't put your, and I think it's even friendlier than signs that you might put out as well.
And let's go to the next image. Here we have an idea of the scope of the length of that. Is that 200 foot border? Is this looking from the corner down the sidewalk?
It is. If you're standing at what would be the northwest corner of the front of the house and looking down, and even here, you probably really can't see just how long it is. It's quite a long stretch.
Ed, let's also talk about your fencing on the other side, which I understand is necessary fencing for your rabbit issues.
It is. And it's funny because I have been 20 years in this industry giving advice. I give talks, and of course, rabbit, deer, all of those issues always come up. And my advice to people on rabbits is, well, the most effective are gun, which a lot of people can't use, dogs, and a lot of people might not have them, or fencing. So I moved to this site and I was having tremendous amounts of rabbit issues and complaining and, using Milorganite and all the various deterrents and things. And suddenly it occurred to me, I'm not even taking my own advice. So I decided to do what I've been preaching and put in the fence. It was important to me because the neighborhood really likes the garden, that I didn't want a 6-foot fence. There was already a 6-foot fence around the back garden, and I like that. That provides some privacy. But for the rest of the garden, I wanted it still to be neighborhood friendly. So I made it a 3-foot fence, but it's very important that you also then make it solid board because rabbits can squeeze through almost anything. And I will tell everybody there is chicken wire at the base of this fence on the interior that goes down farther too, because even solid wood.
How far down does that go about, Ed?
It only probably goes about another 8 inches.
Okay.
But again, it's important because if that fence comes down to ground level, you can't bury it. It will rot the bottom of the fence. Rabbits will dig under it. So even saying fence is one of your best options, you still have to make sure they can't dig under as well.
So, and I also noticed you left a strip that you have planted. About how wide a strip is that?
That's 18 inches, and actually that was required. It's interesting the things you learn when you do these projects. Initially, my vision was that fence would come right out to the sidewalk. You're a gardener, you want all that interior space. It was the fence company that said no, the city won't allow you to do that. You need about a 12-inch easement back to the fence. And I said, well, let's make it 18, just to be absolutely sure. I don't want someone having me take that fence down once it's up. So then once you have that, then you have to figure out what you're putting in there. I inherited an enormous amount of what I call some of the more common hostas when I moved to the house. So I've used a lot of those hostas in areas to fill temporarily. And then as I keep increasing and I want to put in what I consider more special plants, they will take place of it. You can see here, there's the standard medio variegata hosta alternated with a green one, but you'll also notice that already I'm starting to replace them. There's a blue there, there's a couple of golds, but they're making for a great place setter. Also, I wasn't sure how good the soil would be in that particular area. So I started with something really tough that could handle the sidewalk issues, people going by, things of that nature.
Let's look at the next image. And now we're looking, this is actually sort of the opposite view, looking from the health strip to the side of your house in your side garden. You tell us a little bit about your arbors. You have two really distinctive arbors, I noticed.
I do, and I'm a real advocate of, to the degree that you can afford it, of using artists and particularly local artists and getting art in your garden. And we all have different price levels that we can do that. This arbor and the one out front that has the dragons on it were created by an artist in Dubuque. I actually purchased them while I was in Wisconsin. These things are massively heavy. The movers, every time they came to look at what I had to move to Iowa, they'd look at them and say, now those aren't going, are they? But they're solid. Those things don't move. And what I used them for here is they are over the two primary gates. So they make for a nice entrance. I have some arbors that I put vines on, but there are arbors like these that I think are standalone for their artistic value. I wouldn't have vines climbing on them because I think the beautiful detail, this one's called the Tree of Life, you would miss that if I covered it with plant materials.
Let's look at the next image. And here's a beautiful view of your gazebo, or let's really call it what it is. It's an orangerie. And also, I want to address sometime, Ed, about how you established your paths, because I thought it was such good advice how you came up with and how you created these pathways.
The original paths I marked out with roping, so I knew where they were. But the first 2 years, they were mulch. And the reasoning is, and you'll see what I ended up doing is this really the gravel with some limestone screenings underneath it. I think you need to give yourself a year or two of non-permanent paths to make sure that's where you want them. Because once you go to this extent, changing them can be quite difficult, labor intensive and more costly. So I went 2 years with the mulch paths, and I used black mulch. It's the only place that I would use something like a colored wood mulch, but it looked nice. And then fortunately I decided, yep, indeed, this is where I want those paths. And then I came in year number 3 and put down the gravel. There is edging as well. I certainly don't want that gravel all in the beds and such.
Such good advice for folks who are starting out to let time decide where those paths go and where are the most efficient places for those paths in your garden.
And I will say I've learned a lot of things by making my own mistakes. The garden I had in Wisconsin, I made one very large area of the front into garden, and then after because I want everything in plants, right? And then I realized I had created a little bit of difficulty of my access in to work in that garden. So then I created a path that went through after the fact. And that's when it taught me, think these things out as best you can early on in the game.
And in this next image, Ed, we can get a little peek at some of the plants you have that you've used to decorate the outside of your gazebo.
I really, I love tropicals. I love a lot of these annuals that grow really fast. My idea on the gazebo is I want sort of a wall of vining, flowering plants. These are the annual black-eyed Susan vines or Thunbergia. I have various colors because they do come in various colors. As long as you keep a regular fertilization regime on these, they grow very quickly, and even by the end of June, you have this wall of beautiful flowering vines.
And the next image, we get a peek inside. Is that where you're sitting right now?
It is, and I will confess it's the winter and it's a backdrop in back of me, but that is the interior of the gazebo. My partner does woodworking. He's the one that built the potting bench. What's fun is if you have somebody who is a woodworker but not a gardener, you tell them they want a potting bench, they put their own spin on it. Everybody that's a gardener has commented, they're like, that's like a piece of furniture. So it serves as a potting bench, but then when I have all of that, all of my potting and planting and done by early spring, then it converts into an entertainment area, place where, and in fact, I've had garden groups come through. We've served food out in the gazebo, and then that potting bench is where we serve beverages and wine. So it works very well for it's multi-purpose.
And in the next shot, we have another little detail to show that you're actually even growing your vining plants in the inside, not just on the outside of the gazebo.
Yeah, and I'll tell people it is wisteria, and you have to be careful with wisteria. Wisteria needs tremendous support. It can grow very fast and very heavy. But I thought wouldn't be really cool where it comes all the way up that side to then have it come on the interior, and it won't flower on the interior. It's not getting enough sun, but it does prevent this or present this whole sort of a canopy look within. And you're seeing it here sort of early in the season. By the end of the season, that whole side of the roof will be all in foliage.
Covered. And the next image, we get to see your very beautiful rock garden. And this is a type of rock garden called a crevice garden. Am I not mistaken?
That is correct. Yes.
Just because folks can get the magazine to read about how you created it, but this is sort of built up. You really didn't amend the soil when you created these beds, correct?
I did not. And in fact, this is for alpine plants, and specifically for those alpine plants that grow in rocky crevice type areas in upper elevations, usually above 10,000 feet in the mountains. And so there really is very little any type of what we would consider soil in those environments. It's all ground up substrate that the glaciers are grinding up rock. So this is a mix, the substrate that everything's growing in, of about half a coarse sand, like a torpedo sand, and half pea gravel. And so I built it up from the ground up. Now, I will also say that the soil underneath it was decent soil, but you don't really need the depth. And once you do that and then you do your planting, then you take pea gravel, and the pea gravel you use as mulch around those little plants. One of the things
to hold them in place.
Well, it's also to hold them up a little bit. Because in our winter weather, spring weather, getting moisture around the crowns of these plants and just underneath the base of some of those plants rots them out. So it's the same thing you're doing with your perennials in your garden, getting mulch around them. But here you want it to be really well drained. It's protecting the base of that plant, but allowing the water to go down through at the same time.
And you can see in the next image how it abuts the foundation of your house.
Yeah, this particular piece of the crevice garden runs along the path that's between the house and the gazebo. And that's about 5 feet. And I told you, I'll use every little bit of space I think is available. Originally, when I moved here, I was putting containers along there. But then I thought, oh, there's just enough room for little teeny tiny plants. And so that portion of the crevice garden probably comes out about 2.5 feet of that path. And then once it comes out to the end of the gazebo, it widens out into a semicircular area joining the rest of the garden. But these are great gardens to put in where you can't grow very large plants.
And in the next image, we can see your other arbor that you referred to earlier. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, you'll see I'm also wearing a dragon shirt. I love anything to do with mythology, and there are sculptures in the gardens that are dragons. I have griffins and gargoyles. And so when the art, I found this piece of art in Wisconsin, of course, I was drawn right to it because I love dragons, but also it is so creative. So I purchased it because I do love dragons. And it's interesting because after I moved in and got the garden set up, I found out that the children in the neighborhood were calling this the Dragon House.
Appropriately enough. In the next image, we can see another one of your beautiful Orient pets. This is Citrine Angel. Is there anything you want to tell us about Citrine Angel?
It is one of the fragrant ones, and I did mention that lilies still have fragrance, but that's not even universal amongst lilies. So when you're purchasing your lilies, any lily supplier will put fragrant, slightly fragrant, non-fragrant. A lot of the Asiatics do not have fragrance, so that's why I probably don't have as many of those. But yeah, Citrine Angel, one of the, and you'll notice, anyway, it's in the very front garden near the porch. And I always place the most fragrant of the lilies in the areas where if I think I'm sitting at twilight, that time of day when I decided, that glass of wine, sitting out and enjoying the garden, and that time of day when fragrance sort of permeates the garden. So placement sometimes is important to me as well.
Ed, we're going to run out of time here. In the next image, we can see the inside view of your side garden and your beautiful Empress Wu hosta. I don't know if there's anything you want to say except how lovely that the pathway is so generous and it looks so natural and like it's been there for years.
And I'd like to point out that's the true north side. So all of you that think that, oh, I can't get lush plants in north, you absolutely can. It's a matter of the plant materials you're selecting. And Empress Wu, that's only 3 years old. She'll be massive by the time she reaches maturity.
Ed, go to the next image if you can. Here's a beautiful combination you have with your stackies, your betony, the lovely night rider lily, and even the past seed heads of the allium that provide so much sort of texture and architecture to this.
Yeah, I don't cut them down right away. I let the seed heads linger for a while because they have structure too.
I'd go to the next image too, because here are 4 of your beautiful lilies, just 4 of the thousands and thousands you have. Just to give folks idea of the colors and the textures and the shapes that they bring to the garden. And in the next image, we have a close-up of Night Rider, and there's Sweet Zanica.
In the garden, those two are together intentionally because I like the color echo of the dark maroonish purple of Night Rider that's then reflected in the Sweet Zanica.
And Ed, if we go to that last picture, we can see a beautiful portrait of you with your garden behind you. I have to say, it's so generous of you to share your garden with us at this time of year. Both of us are in Iowa, and we probably have a foot of snow outside. So this has been a great treat at this time of year, especially. But we love seeing your garden, and thank you for sharing it with us today. And I hope folks pick up the March-April issue of Garden Gate magazine to find out more of Ed's great advice and to see even more of his beautiful garden right here in Ames, Iowa. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Hi, I'm Kristen Bean Sullivan with Garden Gate Magazine. If you like this video, be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you'll find tips, garden ideas, and how-to help. And be sure and click the bell so you can be notified every time we upload a new video.